Wow, what a ridiculous finish as we watched Isaiah Likely's toe out by about half an inch to save the Chiefs potentially. I think that kind of becomes my first and biggest takeaway. I'll criticize Harbaugh in just a second, but I look back to third quarter, about 4.5 minutes left. The Chiefs are driving up 10 points. Andy Reid is forced with 4th and 5 from the 40. Chance to pick up a first down and put the game away. What does he end up doing? He punts it into the end zone, gives the Ravens a little bit of life. And to me, I was coming into this saying, boy, I thought that was in. I thought the Ravens were going to go for 2, and I thought we would see a situation where it's picking on Andy Reid for that punt. But boy, I think he gets away with a little bit of luck on that regard with how that finished. But I think it's fair to really point the finger here at how Harbaugh handled the end of both of these halves. So going back to the second quarter, a minute 3 on the clock, they end up getting the first down, and they're seeing a first down at the Kansas City 28. They let 32 seconds run off the clock before they start taking timeouts, and they end up forced to settle for a field goal at the end of half. And whether that was Harbaugh outthinking himself or just mismanaging the timeouts, that certainly stands out as they ended up being forced and rushed with time to kick the field goal on third down instead of getting an extra play off. But you look at how they handled things there in the fourth quarter. I get on one aspect, you're trying to keep a gassed Chiefs defense that we saw taking a knee, clearly out of breath, clearly gassed at the end of the game. You're trying to keep them on the field and not allow them to change. But they were at the line of scrimmage on that final drive with 33 seconds left. And there was about 18 seconds wasted by Lamar trying to line everybody up. And it goes to show, like, you end up not having to spike the football to potentially kill it down and get an extra breather to run up and line up a play. And it goes to show that Harbaugh wasting those timeouts as the second half goes on just because of misalignment, not being able to get guys set at the line of scrimmage. I mean, what a wasted opportunity that becomes at the end of the game. And so, to me, you're in that situation. You're at the line with a first down after the big Bateman catch. Everybody's running down the field. You're looking at 1st and 10 with 30 plus seconds left as you're at the line. You end up taking the first down snap with 16 seconds on the clock. You're snapping the football on second down with 10 seconds. I mean, there's an easy opportunity there to stop the clock and get away with it. But ultimately, it ends up with Kansas City getting out and essentially escaping from what looked like a spot where Baltimore could get back in the back door, potentially cover. That's just an interesting finish to the game and a great way to start the season. So good to have everybody back. Live reaction show here on the Right Angle Sports YouTube channel. If it's your first time by, the subscribe button's down below. Hit the thumbs up button for the like. If you're enjoying the videos that we've been doing all week, we'll be doing a lot of these recap shows after the main primetime games all season long. Have a ton of notes that I took as I was watching that game. We'll go through each of them, give you my thoughts as we got to see two of the AFC contenders go at it. So I would say, first of all, that punt by Andy Reid sure got taken away. Harbaugh, when I look at how he handled the second quarter ending, fourth quarter ending, I think he could have done a lot better and provided a little bit more opportunity there. Those were my first two big takeaways just right in the moment. But as we take a step back, take a bit of a breather, and we're looking at this game and saying, like, what went on from a betting perspective? So market-wise, side was in a battle all week, 2.5, 3. I think that ended up to look like and present like a pretty good number. Chiefs dominate the yards per play, but Baltimore ends up running a ton of plays. We'll talk about the box score in just a second. But you look at the total, 46-47 back and forth, lands on 47. So for the most part, over bettors are probably pretty happy, but another really well-priced total. Getting to more just like bigger takeaways here. So the drops at Arrowhead continue. When I look back to a very popular Stats by Lopez tweet, there have been more drops per game at night games played at Arrowhead Stadium than any other stadium at any other time of day anywhere in the NFL. It's a problem that has existed for many years. The study of dropped passes goes back to 2013 that he ran, and the most drops anywhere in the league happen at Arrowhead at night. And the Chiefs opening few drives, I mean, it looked just like 2023 with those receivers dropping passes, bouncing in and out of their hands. There was probably some frustration for Chiefs fans with those drops, but that's just the reality of playing night games at Arrowhead. and just it's the fans wearing red, it's the boards, it's the lighting. It's a very hard environment to make catches. And we saw a couple in the second half that I wouldn't classify as egregious drops, but I mean there was some bad ones along the way from running backs out of the backfield. Pacheco had a really bad one in the second half. There was another one that Pirine had that was really bad. Some of the Ravens receivers too ended up in spots. So that's something to watch as you go throughout the season with the Chiefs featured so often. If you end up getting the Arrowhead game at night later in the year, these drops are always an issue that plague teams that come in and play an Arrowhead, especially at night. I thought the Baltimore offensive line, they did a great job for the most part early disguising it, moving around multiple tight ends, getting the fullback Ricard involved. They were really trying to go away from the left side of the right side of the line and run left. They did a good job at doing it, but the game state really forced them into a different scenario where they had to pass. They had to play a little bit of catch up. What I don't know, were the Chiefs loading the box at a much higher rate after that first drive? Because I watched that first drive for Baltimore, and my takeaway was this is the game plan that the Ravens wanted to have in the AFC Championship that everybody was calling for. Now they're running it, and they're going to get away with it. 8 runs, 3 passes on that opening drive. Their next 4 drives, they went 12 pass, 4 run. Completely flipped. I don't know because we don't have numbers for it, which is kind of crazy thinking about the next-gen stuff. Like, did the Chiefs change formations? Were they stacking the box? Were they playing up at the line? They bring more guys in. Did that force the Ravens to play off of that? Because you're not going to run into that with the bad offensive line. Hard to say, but what I take away from that is that Ravens right side of the O-line is a mess, and they don't have a solution for it. They have an O-line coaching change that they were forced into make because of the tragedy. That's a tough situation that they're going to have to figure out a way to deal with. And that brings me to my other point, which was we saw skinny Lamar back on the field. I mean, he was trim. He's as light as we've looked in a long time. I thought he was a much more willing runner than we have seen in a very long time. And the Kansas City Chiefs, over the last 2 seasons played, have been the worst team in the NFL at defending quarterback runs of any kind. And so Lamar really took it on himself to be an active runner in this game. And I think it's something just based on the body type change and the mentality change that we're going to see a lot often. 16 runs tonight for 122 yards, 7.6 a carry. That was significant. And it was a big difference in how he looked and how he treated things on field. So Lamar the runner and Lamar the willing runner, he's dropping his head, he's dropping his non-throwing shoulder. It was scary on some of those hits to see. I think if you're a Ravens fan leading with the lead side, he was going with the non-throwing shoulder, but he's diving head first. That was the Lamar of old that we saw a couple years ago coming back. And so that's a major weapon that the Ravens have if he's going to be taking that on himself in this offense to do that. Now, it could have been partially just because of the matchup and how bad the Chiefs are at defending quarterback runs, but it was hard not to notice just how effective he was running the football and how different he looked leadership-wise, poise-wise, running-wise. That was a very different Lamar than what we've seen and a deadly Lamar that teams are going to have to deal with. Now, the full next-gen numbers aren't fully in. In the first half, the Ravens blitzed 1 time. They weren't a crazy high blitz rate team a year ago defensively, generated a lot of pressure, a lot of simulated pressure from Mike McDonald. The defense felt very different, and that low blitz rate was hard to ignore. Now, blitzing Patrick Mahomes, typically a negative. It's something you don't want to do, but to see them go that drastically away from it was kind of jarring, and I wonder, kind of getting a grasp on what Zach Orr is as a defensive coordinator is a big thing to try to figure out, because you think about the Ravens, Wink Martindale to Mike McDonald, and the drastic differences between those two. This felt a lot more like a McDonald defense than it did a Wink defense from the aggression up front. Roquan Smith was picked on a ton throughout the game, and you could see the frustration come out with that bad penalty that he took, and he should have got flagged for another one on that hit out of bounds on Mahomes. Bit of a dive by Mahomes, no question about it, but we were seeing the Chiefs go right at him and pick on him, and really, if it wasn't for that pick that he had, which is just a complete blunder by Mahomes, I think we're looking at him and really being a big factor that was, in a weird way that you typically don't see, a very detrimental piece to the defense for the Ravens. Now, is it something I expect to continue? No, but it was a rarity to see a guy like that in the middle just get picked on by the Chiefs continuously. And so a very different look for the Ravens defense, and like rating wise or thoughts wise, I don't know where I go with that as we're looking to go forward. Another thing that I would point out, lots of Ravens notes to take away from this, just because the team is so different. So Rashad Bateman makes the big catch at the end. He ends up with 2 receptions for 53 yards, gets over his prop total. I know Bateman was a fantasy hype darling all offseason and loved in the prop markets, loved in the betting markets. Everybody wanted a piece of Bateman. As something I found out very interesting as I was going through preseason previews, talking with a Ravens scout, was that Bateman's involvement in the offense is entirely dependent on timing. His entire route tree is very attached to timing. And so we saw a game tonight where the Ravens offensive line was disrupted from the get-go. Chris Jones was wreaking havoc. There was no timing element to the offense. And we saw Bateman really not be that big of a factor in the game when he's compared relative to Zay Flowers or Isaiah Likely, because that timing was disrupted and not there. We saw Bateman really take the brunt of that. And if not for that big catch at the end, his stat line was disappointing a lot of bettors and a lot of fantasy players. Made up for it with that catch from the prop perspective. But something to keep in mind as you watch this Ravens offensive line struggle all season is that every time they're facing a great pass rush, like you saw from the Chiefs, Bateman's likely to be a lot less involved in the offense just because of that timing and how dependent he is with it in the offense. When it comes to the tight end scenario, Mark Andrews was an afterthought for the most part. 2 receptions, 14 yards, 2 targets. Now, what's interesting about Andrews is through the 5 games that he's played against the Kansas City Chiefs combined, he's been held under 100 yards total. So the Chiefs have defended Andrews well forever. And this game, coming off a disrupted practice coming into the season, the car accident, I think you're giving him a bit of a pass. Week 1 can be easy to overreact and come with a big takeaway. I think you have to give him a bit of a pass just coming into this, considering how well the Chiefs have defended. I think there's no question we're looking at this offense with the chance that Isaiah Likely is going to be the number 1 receiver. 12 targets, 9 catches, 111 yards. Major game for him and a major standout performance. But I wonder if Andrews now becomes a little bit undervalued going forward, just because this matchup kind of shaded him so much one way, similar to Bateman, but a lot more involvement-wise too. We'll see. Now they have the extra kind of mini bye for him to get acclimated. I think you're probably going to see a lot better week 2 and week 3 from Mark Andrews than you saw in week 1. And now everybody's going to be talking about Isaiah Likely, rightfully so. But I think we'll see that shift in the coming weeks too. The last one I would say is Zay Flowers. Major part of the offense too. He's the clear number 1 target. I think he's still ahead of Likely. I think you're going to see Zay Flowers have some big games as well, and missed in the end zone. Lamar will get criticized for the wide open pass, and seeing him there, there was a defender right in Lamar's face. When you see it, the hands were up. Lamar had to go around them. So I'm not really docking him for that, but that could have been a major statement point made by Flowers early. But I think he's a guy in the offense that's very maybe looked at more so just because of all that Bateman hype now being taken away. We'll see how that looks like. But a lot of thoughts on the Ravens offense, a lot of thoughts on the Ravens defense. For me, I look at the Chiefs. What more do you want in this team as a Super Bowl contender? I mean, they find ways to survive these games. And it was a game that they were comfortably in the lead for. They had that first drive of the game where the Baltimore Ravens used 2 tight ends, got the fullback Ricard involved, looked very physical. And despite being forced into some third downs, I mean, Baltimore made that first drive look very easy. And I mean, Kansas City didn't skip a beat. And it was almost to me like that drive, the second drive of the game where Kansas City went and scored to make it 7-7, the Ravens' confidence just dropped a notch after that because the Chiefs made it look so easy. And you take such a beating on that opening drive and then march down and score that touchdown. I mean, this is a team that's absolutely in line to make a run and three-peat at this rate. Like I have no real negatives to take away from the Chiefs, because even when it looked like kind of late second quarter, early third quarter, you might have a scenario where they're faltering a little bit. They had the red zone drops. They weren't finishing drives. It was still just dominant from them. And so 7.1 yards per play to 6.1 yards per play, a difference of 1 yard per play typically results in a 10-point victory in the NFL. And Chiefs end up winning by 7 by a toe. I get it, but you have to look at some of those red zone drives that were squandered by Kansas City. So where does this leave both of the teams coming out of this game. And what are we looking at? Well, I'd say Kansas City stays consistent rating-wise. Don't have anything to knock on them either side of the football. I could say that the Chiefs, not necessarily as sharp as they could have been, and yet they still got away with a victory against a great opponent in Baltimore. For the Ravens, I think offensive line is just a major concern on the right side. I don't know how they're going to scheme and play around that. That's going to be an impact all season long. So, like, offensively, I look at the Ravens and I have a little bit of concern there for what they're going to be able to sustain with this group going forward. And I think defensively, perhaps at times, just it's a team with a young defensive coordinator, like we saw with a young offensive coordinator in the playoffs, just marginally outthinking and outsmarting themselves for what they have to do. And I can't kind of get away from feeling like the Ravens did that at times in this game with some of the looks they were playing and just uncharacteristic mistakes and just clunky handling of specific situations, especially on the offensive side late in the second and the fourth quarter, which could have been a lot sharper. So an interesting game, and probably quite fortunate for Kansas City. They get the mini bye for that defense that was gassed after being on the field for 75 plays, that they get extra rest and time to prepare for the Cincinnati Bengals on deck. So that was an interesting and a fun game, and just a thrilling way to start the NFL regular season. We've got a great game coming up tomorrow. The Green Bay Packers, Philadelphia Eagles in Brazil. I'm very much looking forward to that one. I'll be back with another reaction video after that game concludes. My live reactions for all the primetime games all season long here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. So if you enjoyed it, subscribe button's down below. Leave a like, leave a thumbs up. Appreciate it very much. And we'll talk to you in the morning with the next episode of the podcast. And then right back here tomorrow night after the Packers and Eagles game concludes.